Okay, it is 6:37 on August the 3rd. I'd like to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Can I have, Rita, can you call the roll, please?
Sorry. Okay. Commissioner Gunno?
Present.
Commissioner Ayres?
Present.
Commissioner Nishioka?
Present.
Commissioner Hall?
Present.
Commissioner Bottenberg?
Present.
Commissioner Kaler?
Present.
Okay, and Nishina, I don't see Nishina. Okay.
I'm sure she'll be here. So, I'd like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
We have a flag.
Mike, where's the flag, buddy?
Allegiance to the flag of the
There
United
we go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America,
and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
Justice.
with
liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
That was horrible.
There's a lot of delays keep kicking up. It's okay. I wish I had a faster computer. Has everybody had a chance to look at the agenda?
Yep.
Yes.
I'll accept the motion to accept the agenda.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? The agenda's been approved. Did everybody have a chance to look at the minutes from the July 22nd meeting?
Yep.
Are there any changes or omissions?
Do a motion to accept first.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Good, the minutes have been approved. Boom. Now's the time for either written or verbal comment. I know Mr. Gardner's on. And this is a 3-minute time limit, or 5 minutes if you're representing a recognized community organization. Mike will keep track of the time for you, and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm speaking on behalf of NAMI Eastside, which I believe is a recognized local mental health charity. So I hope I can have my 5 minutes. Good evening, everybody. My name is Paul Gardner. I live in Sammamish. I'm here on behalf of NAMI Eastside, which is an affiliate of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. NAMI is America's largest grassroots mental health organization. I am a NAMI Eastside Board Vice President with responsibility for advocacy, and I have both personal and family experience of mental illness. 1 in 5 adult Americans have experience of mental illness. Recovery from mental illness usually requires 4 things: diagnosis, medication, therapy, and support. With those, recovery is entirely possible. Our NAMI Eastside mission statement lays out why we exist: to improve the quality of life for all those affected by mental health conditions through advocacy, community awareness, education, and support. And I'm here really to do my advocacy and community awareness piece. We have one full-time and one part-time paid staff. We are normally found at the Together Centre in Redmond, but the office closed and all our education and support programs went online as soon as the Stay Home, Stay Safe order was issued in March. All our programs are provided by NAMI national accredited trained volunteers, and all are free to participants. We focus on improving quality of life by providing knowledge that destigmatizes mental illness with programs such as Mental Health First Aid, NAMI Smarts for Advocacy, Family and Friends, and Family to Family classes, and also a course that we're working up, given the current circumstances, called Ending the Silence for middle and high school students. We focus on improving the quality of life by supplying mutual support, and that includes peer support groups. We have 5 of those a week online. Family support groups. We have 7 a month of those online, including one that was originally at Sammamish Mary Queen of Peace. And we hold the geographic groups together because of their previous experience, working together and supporting each other. We also have spirituality support groups. We have 3 of those a month online. And we just started a COVID-19 healthcare provider support group, and we have 2 a week of those. You can see much more detail on all of these activities at NAMIeastside.org. We have seen a significant, as you can expect, we've seen a significant increase in participation since the pandemic began. And today in Washington, we need an increase in services that help people cope. I would encourage you to consider funding the work that NAMI Eastside does and assisting us with publicizing our work. We are active in Sammamish and would very much appreciate your support. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comment? You're welcome to stay, Mr. Gardner.
I noted that several people were deprived of their dinner, and I'm also in that situation, so I'm going to head out if you don't mind. But I do appreciate it.
And
Thank you very
for
much.
taking the time out to speak to us. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night. So we're under new business. Rita, are you going to give us the staff update?
Yep, I am just going to jump in and take a few minutes of your time. So we always kind of felt like with COVID that the need was greater for services. Oh, hi, Nishina.
Hi.
Hi. So just to give you up to speed, Nishina, I'm just starting my the staff report. So we always said that we knew that the need was greater with COVID and the pandemic. However, we felt like Q2 was a really good way of showing and allowing us to see in a tangible way the impact the pandemic has had with nonprofit providers and service units. So Q2 is April, May, and June. So, we're all firmly, we're getting reporting now that's firmly in the COVID time period, the pandemic time period. Many providers are having less service units than last year. So, for instance, TeenLink, they have next to no service units this quarter. The reason being is that teens go to the center to actually take calls, and because of COVID, they've rerouted that to volunteers. Clearly, they haven't taken that many calls, so I'm investigating to see what's going on there. But overall, we've seen nonprofits trying to sort of, change the way they're offering business, and they're doing more virtually, and all seem to have settled down into the new norm now. So I'm just going to highlight some things that we've seen with Q2. So LifeWire has seen an overall decrease in the number of helpline calls, and this is consistent with other sister domestic violence organizations within King County. The reason being is that survivors are sheltering in place with their abusers and cannot safely reach out for help. However, LifeWire have also seen an increase in the number of calls for basic needs such as rent and food, etc. And again, they really do anticipate that as lockdown eases, they expect to see an increase in calls. HopeLink is not collecting any demographic data, but currently, but in all probability, I'm sure it's going to follow Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank's trajectory. So the number of new residents that Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank had in quarter 2 2019 was 18. And in quarter 2 2020, this has increased to 38 new clients in this quarter alone. We've also seen Crisis Line has seen an increase of 53% of all calls coming in for this quarter 2 2020 as compared to quarter 2 2019. And that's an increase from 336 calls to 589 calls. So Issaquah Community Services, that's a rental assistance program. They've seen the number of residents they've served this quarter increase from 49 in quarter 2 2019 to 170 in quarter 2 2020. St. Vincent de Paul, which is the other rental assistance program, they've increased the amount they've donated into the community from 6,721 in quarter 2 2019 to 17,062 in quarter 2 2020. So since COVID, they've relaxed their 6-month rule, where before they would only give allocations every 6 months. They've relaxed that because they realized there's an increased need from households. So the dollar per intervention is higher, with $389 per intervention in 2019 to now to $632 per intervention in 2020. And they've also seen that the need is more acute with many clients losing their jobs. And they've also, the number of rent interventions has increased by 50% this quarter. Lake Washington Schools Foundation has pantry packs, and they've seen their unduplicated numbers increase from 1 new person in 2019, quarter 2, to 24 new people in quarter 2, 2020. Their service units are food bundles, so things like popcorn, shelf-stable milk, a protein, pasta, that type of thing. That's their service units. And in quarter 2 2019, the number of bundles they gave was 241. And in quarter 2 2020, it's an astronomical 2,353. So obviously, with the pandemic, they're giving more food bundles and a more frequent, before they were giving on a Friday, whereas now they're giving more frequently throughout the week. So those are really the high level, highlights that we saw. So we've definitely seen an increase in the areas of food assistance, calls to Crisis Line, and rental assistance in particular. So that was it. I just thought I'd give you guys an overview there. If you have any questions, please ask away.
Rita, last time you showed us that postcard, we were waiting on council approval. Did we get council approval? Or?
You know what? It is actually at the printers as we speak. There's council approval, and we're picking up the proof tomorrow. And it's end of the week. Yeah, as long as it gets the thumbs up from me and Mike, we're good to go. Yeah.
Good. That's good. It'll be good. Helpful.
I turn my microphone back on. Once you and Mike give it your blessing, can you send us a copy of the PDF so we can take a look at it? Just for us, before it's mailed out.
So did I hear, Stan, that you'd like the PDF version of the postcard? Yeah, by all means, please. We can send that to the commission tomorrow morning.
Well, I want to make sure you and Mike have approved it before you send it to us.
Is there another question? I'm sorry, Rita, do you have something to say?
No, go
No,
ahead.
Mike is sending it as we speak. Not even tomorrow morning. Real time, you'll get it now in your inbox.
This notion of rental assistance is accelerating both in number and kind of scale. What are your thoughts, like down the road, can the city of Sammamish pour more money into that potentially? Or I know we've given some more, which is good, but everything I'm hearing is things are going to get potentially worse. It has to do with stimulus package as well. But I know you don't have an answer, but is there a thought that those kinds of groups will gain more funding down the road?
Well, I think council have really wanted to be kept updated as to what's happening. So they get, the weekly reports from Human Services. And then next week at the council meeting, we're going to be going over Q2 data. So I feel like they really wanted to see some data points and sort of like, a comparison to see if there are any trends. So they're going to be having a more detailed kind of like deep dive into what I've shared with you today. So it's really up to council, but I think, they'll have all that information.
Okay, thank you.
I noticed some posts from the deputy mayor and from Pam Stewart dealing with COVID funding for businesses.
Mhm.
And I didn't know if in the next round of funding, if they were looking at taking care of the needs like they did last time. Have you heard anything at all about that?
Hey, Stan, this is Mike. Yeah, I think the intent, the first round of funding obviously went towards small business grants because we did receive that funding from King County to pass that along. So as you might have seen, if you've been to our website recently, that small business grant program is currently open through April 20th. As far as nonprofit grants go, as Rita mentioned, I think they want to see, council wants to see some Q2 data to help inform their decisions of, how much and where they might be giving some additional grant funding to nonprofits. So I would anticipate that there will be another round like we did for small businesses for nonprofits. I obviously can't say for certain, but I think we should know more after the meeting next week on the 11th.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything else for staff? Thank you, Mike and Rita. Appreciate it. So let's go ahead and go into our little study session on our book, White Fragility. It's supposed to be on chapters 1 through 3. I went ahead and read the 5 and was going to get into 6, but I had to take care of a wife.
I thought it said
So,
1 to 2 on the agenda.
I'm sorry.
I thought on the agenda it's chapter 1 to 2. Rita, is that right or wrong? That's what I saw today. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the original minutes said 1 and 2.
Yeah, it did. Up to page 38, and then it changed to 50 all of a sudden.
Well, I think 1 and
Okay.
2, there's a lot to talk about in 1 and 2. So we can just,
Yeah.
if folks haven't read it, I think 1 and 2 is good.
So I'd like to thank Jody and Tom for sending out some recommended questions and topics. Jody, since you sent out the last one, would you like to take the lead on this?
Well, I wasn't sure. I thought I have a couple of top questions, and then Tom had some different questions. I thought maybe we could just agree on a couple of questions. I think my questions are a little more specific to the chapters than Tom's, but I think maybe some of these, maybe we could start out with one of Tom's that's more general to sort of warm us up, and then maybe we can dive in a little deeper. What do you think?
Right.
So
I'm fine with that. I think we start with what was your overall impression? And I can give mine if you want.
Sure.
The overall impression of the first few chapters was more focused on history, I thought. than it was on what can be done, where we can go, and things like that. And I'm hoping that's going to develop a little further in the book. Was that an impression that you guys got or not? Anybody can speak up.
So what I think I would offer to start is that there was a lot going on in everything we read, and there's a lot of personal challenge as well for me and probably for everybody. So I just want to say, for me, tonight's discussion, we're not looking for any perfect answer. We're looking to share impressions. This is a journey we're all on. So, you know, having read all this, I found myself saying, I wish I could have read it 5 times to be as prepared as you'd want for this kind of thing. And oh, by the way, I only got through 50 pages, right? So I'm just going to say out loud, if you're feeling like me, like I can give you my impressions, but I also want to reflect on it and hear what other people have to say. That's kind of where I am right now. My overall impression, I came away understanding in more detail. I'm still learning what is meant by systemic racism. Because some of the quotes could have been recorded by what I might have said over the years. Like, I'm a good guy and I want everybody to do well, so I'm not racist. Well, if you really get, I love the way they talked. We'll get more into this because this is one of Jody's questions, but prejudice versus racism and what it really is. But my overall impression is I came away with a better understanding of what is truly meant by systemic racism. And also I want to offer that there's a difference between what you might say is you're not racist versus actively working to improve the system around us as opposed to causing no harm, if you will. So a thoughtful approach might be, how can we make an impact versus just saying, okay, now I understand it, more action oriented. So those were 2 things I would share to start.
Yeah, I really appreciate, Tom, your naming that, you know, this is hard stuff and, you know, you have to read it multiple times to get it. This is my 3rd time I'm reading it, and I had, you know, I took notes, which I've taken notes before, but like just to solidify. And I just want to say too, yeah, I agree. It's a journey, and we are in relationship together, as I've mentioned before. And I think we have to sort of prepare ourselves that we're not going to be perfect and we're going to be making mistakes. And I don't want to say that it's like a completely safe place that you can say anything and make any kind of mistakes, because to say that would mean you could say anything whether or not you're causing harm. And we might cause harm to each other inadvertently or unintentionally. But I do think that talking about race is really, really hard. And I just want to name that. And I think that, you know, we will make mistakes, and maybe some of us might feel a little hurt or offended. And that's normal. I think we can validate everybody's feelings. But I think we just have to try and be as thoughtful as possible, while also like holding multiple truths, right? Like trying to be as thoughtful as possible, but at the same time recognizing that this is super hard. And for many of us, some of it is kind of new. And so we're going to make mistakes. And I'm going to, at least for me, I'm going to really try. And I know all of you, I've worked with all of you, give grace. And I hope you'll also do the same for me. At the same time, trying to be thoughtful. So yeah, I just want to name that this is really, really hard stuff, super hard stuff. So and then in terms of my overall, what I like about these first 2 chapters is it sets a framework and some guidance on language, like the definitions of racism, white supremacy, racism, discrimination, and prejudice, the difference between those 3, you know, and then sort of some big concepts, white supremacy, race is a social construct, sort of these sort of foundational concepts that are framework that we need to be able to understand if we're going to have this kind of deeper conversation. And so some of these terms may not be defined the way that any of us individually have used it in the past, But I will suggest, I'd suggest to all of us as we're reading, because our purpose is to learn as much as we can from this book, is to let's try and practice and use the definitions that she lays out in for purposes of our discussion. It might not be the definition that you use in your life when you talk to your wife or to your kids or whatever, but for purposes of our discussion, then that way we're all using the same terms. And we won't have like, oh no, that's not what I mean. You know, you won't have miscommunication. So that would be my suggestion as we move through talking about this book in particular, is to sort of accept her definitions, even though that's not what you've used. And, you know, even for me, white supremacy, I've now come to terms with the term white supremacy. But when I first heard it, and I heard lots of people saying, no, we're going to use the term white supremacy, there's this like feeling of me like, no, but we're not talking about like those, you know, really bad people. And so kind of, you got to suspend that and say, for purposes of our discussion, let's use this definition. So that's just what I would suggest. And I think it's helpful to be able to have a conversation.
I
I thought
agree.
that
It's
first
easier.
paragraph was really on page 1 sort of defined me there. It's like I was living in La La Land.
The first
Unreal.
paragraph on chapter 1, Joyce?
At first, we don't see ourselves in racial terms. It's like, there I be.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Can you
frustrating.
talk a little more about that, Joyce?
I don't think I can really. I think I have to read this about 4 more times.
I'm with you.
Ugh.
Thank you.
I think the key to moving forward is what we do with our discomfort is important.
Yeah.
Do we have any goal in what we're doing here, where we're hoping to get to, or what's the purpose of this?
This is a learning situation.
Yeah, I think it's to learn so that we can be better, and also like make sure that we're not causing harm based on you know, behaviors that we didn't even know were causing harm as we do our work that impacts our entire community. I mean, our work is important, what we do here in the commission, and it impacts lots of people in our community. And so I think for me, it's about how do we learn about this stuff that may not, all of us have lots of privilege. We may not have understood in a way, and how our behavior by not understanding may actually be causing harm to people of color in our own community that we are entrusted to spend money on make decisions for them. So I think it's about that, making sure that we do the best we can as we make these decisions.
I think it's related also to that equity training that we took.
I was thinking
It's
of
like
that.
opening our eyes to what we should have perceived already. That birdcage, we have a limited view.
Yeah, that birdcage was.
Are there any instances over the last several years this commission has been in effect that, Rita, have you seen people saying that the commission is not treating them in a fair fashion or in a respectful fashion that brings it out? We say we need to become more sensitive, or has anybody else seen that? Anybody complain to us or to the council of our behavior?
No, I don't think that that's the focus of why we're doing this, CJ. I don't really think it's because we're only going to respond and improve ourselves if someone points out that we're bad. I think it's about actively trying to be anti-racist, actively trying to do our best as we are held in trust with the community's money, and act in doing actions that affect many, many individuals in our community. That's our role we take on as commissioners. And it's not about, oh, we're just going to do our normal thing until someone says, hey, you're doing something wrong. It's about us actually wanting to learn and to do our jobs in the best way we can. So I don't really, I mean, I hear your struggle, CJ, but I'm a little, we're feeling a little bit like we're spending time trying to justify this when we've already said we're going to do it. And it's taking time away from us actually doing it.
So my build on that.
There's a new complaint to you, Rita, or to the chair of the commission over the last couple of years about the way we behaved or the way they've been treated?
No one's complained about the way, like the commission's reviewed applications, whatever. I do feel like this is just a great opportunity to get a perspective of what it is to be non-white, and to basically put your feet in. It's a great learning. Like, it's just like, for me, reading this book, and maybe I'm not answering your question, was very cathartic for me, because I don't get a break from being a person of color, right? Like, I go through my life, like, I don't decide, oh, I'm just going to not be a person of color. Like, that's how the world perceives me. I never get a break from that. And so I just think to read something like this, when we have over 30% of our population that is foreign born, that is non-white, I think it's a great learning experience. So that's just my perspective. I don't know if that answers your questions, CJ.
I think I would like to add also, so each one of us came into this work wanting to do good regarding the community. And I think over the years, we've actually done a pretty good job of creating value. And I think actually the reason you'd have a commission like this is you would want them to lead the community in some way as needs become more apparent, and you'd almost expect them to go deeper so they can then bring back to the council and the community what is actually happening out there. So we actually did that on mental wellness. We did that with seniors. In this case, this is an emerging systemic situation that I think we need to find a way to be leaders. And some of that has to be allowing ourselves to be very uncomfortable with this. When I read some of this stuff, I'm like, I want to scream, and then I read it again. So the reason we would do this, and this hopefully wouldn't be the last time the commission would do something like this, is we want to be informed and leaders, and we want to grow from the place we were when we came into this, where we want to lead. So if we stay stagnant, that's not good enough, I don't think. And that's what we're endeavoring to do in a really, really unsettled situation in society right now. So, and we have to be comfortable with, there isn't necessarily a checkbox A, B, C, this is what we're going to get out of it, but I guarantee by the interaction, we will have helped ourselves. And I'm going to go back, and then I'll pause back to what Joyce was talking about. I keep thinking about that one gentleman, not the equity training, the one the meeting when we were in, I think it was in Bellevue, where that gentleman shared with us that you're expecting these grants to come in so polished and perfect because you have an expectation that the grantee has all their I's dotted, but it's entirely possible the people that really need the help are not capable of doing that, but they actually really need our help. And I keep playing that back over and over, like perhaps, people of color in our community need help in a way that we are not yet seeing. And so now I'm looking for that a little more. That's what I would offer.
As this lady who's written this book, I will keep looking to see what people have said about what she is saying here to kind of verify it, or to say they is right on target with what she's doing. Read reviews on that?
Oh, the book itself? Well, I saw something about, first of all, it's a well-regarded book, but there's also people that say it doesn't resonate with them, just like every book you can imagine. And for me, it's not just the book, it's the material and the topic that's critical. So, yeah.
So we're not saying the book is 100% right or 100% wrong. I see this as an opportunity to increase our awareness.
There was an interesting article Sunday New York Times, and not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before, there was a fairly lengthy, in fact, I think it was the cover story about large book. It was pointing out a number of points of view in the book, one being it was one that I recall was that takeaway that as someone who is, there's almost nothing that you and any.
You're cutting out for me anyway, Terry.
Terry, you're cutting out.
Oh, sorry. From before, I'll talk. Hopefully that's better. I was just saying that in this article in the New York Times, there was pointing out that there was some who viewed the book. The takeaway of the book is that as someone is white, it's almost as if there is you can do. Now, I echo Stan's comments. I've read the first 2 chapters, and they do seem to talk much about history, and I am very curious to know how this ends, what she is going to say. I noticed that the last chapter is entitled, "Where do we go here?" I'm very interested. I almost tempted to skip to that chapter, but so I am very interested because there's a sense that, well, what can we do to do better? I agree that we're on a journey here, and that this is an important what we're doing here.
Thank you. Miss Jody, you were saying?
Jody, I think you're muted. I can't hear a thing.
There you go. I just want to say quickly that for me, the book is not about how do white people end racism. Like, what can you do to end racism? It's more about self-awareness, to look at yourself and your own life experience and how you move around in the world, which can just give you a new way of thinking, or maybe another, as Rita said, another perspective that's outside of your own as a white person, to approach the world, to approach problem solving, to approach racism, dealing with race issues in a way that has a different perspective, and just like a greater awareness of what it means to be white. It's not, a how-to book to end racism for white people. It's more like to help you understand your place as a white person and how you move around in the world and how people of color move around the world, so that you have a greater understanding of that. That's my take.
I think that's very fair.
Miss Sheena, we haven't heard from you.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, as an immigrant, I have to say that living in India, I did not, being in the majority, I did not really examine the fact that I was from the upper middle class, that I did not have many of the barriers that many Indians face. And it's just interesting to me, I mean, the lessons from this book, or some of the concepts that D'Angelo is highlighting, they transfer quite well to other contexts where, where there is a clear majority, whether it's a religious majority. In the case of India, and Rita probably knows about it, there's a strong Hindu fundamentalist government in India, which is really oppressing the minority Muslim community there. And I could translate some of the concepts related to institutional racism that I see in India, right? There it's not racism, it's religious bigotry, and there's a lot of casteism in India. The caste system is very much, it privileges people in the upper castes, so a lot of the concepts in this book, to me, they translate quite well to other contexts as well. And as an immigrant, I do have to say, one thing that struck me, which I've found in the other immigration literature also, is how being white is the norm, right? It's the standard. And many immigrant communities over a period of time have tried to pass themselves as white in order to have certain privileges. In this particular book talks about the Armenian community, how they tried everything in their power to become white so that they could have certain privileges. And I know that the Indian community has gone through phases as well. Despite being dark-skinned, Indians have in the past been classified as white and then as non-white and back and forth. There's a whole history around it. So I feel that this book translates very well to, other issues and contexts as well.
Can I ask Nishina? Thank you. Very thoughtful. One of the things the book did do was show how whiteness is de facto the structure of much of society, right? And I find myself wondering, if you are not white and you are part of your own kind of societal group, what would you hope that kind of white society does, or how it acts in a way that embraces who you are, rather than thinking you have to integrate into white society, right? So there was these European immigrants that came over, Italians, Irish, etc. They were actually not even considered white initially, and they found a way because they looked white enough. And I'm not sure if I can, but yet I find myself saying, so as a group, if we could be sensitized to how should we be acting in a way that respects the groups and doesn't expect them to completely assimilate, but rather respects who they are. I'm just wondering if anybody has any thoughts on that.
So there I'll bring up the whole concept of colorblind racism, like the way, the one thing that I think many people of color would say that they don't appreciate is being told that, oh, I don't really see color.
Right.
Because that's not the, because that's not the reality for us. I mean, oh, I don't see race, or I don't, because that's completely not acknowledging the experiences that people of color may have, because that's not my reality, over the years, like I've come across some very nice, thoughtful people, but I've also experienced my share of racism. So to tell me that, oh, I don't see color, that does not acknowledge my reality. So I'd rather people acknowledge who I am for what I am. And I know that as a South Asian, I have many benefits that many other people in other communities of color may not have, because the Asian community in general benefits from being seen as the model minority. So I recognize all the privileges that I, as a South Asian, have in the country compared to, say, an African American colleague or someone from the Latinx community. So, so acknowledging differences doesn't mean that you are being racist, at least from my perspective. I don't know whether Jody, Rita have any perspective on it.
I'm wondering if we should mute ourselves when we're not talking, because we're getting a lot of feedback. It's a little bit harder to understand.
Before I got my earphones on.
Yeah, I just to put on Nishina's point, she uses that example, I think, at the end of chapter 2 about the white woman with her child in a market that says, hey, that man is black, or something like that, and how embarrassed they are, and shushing the child, and how that's really like kind of sending this message, like we don't want to acknowledge that someone's black because that's a bad thing or something. Like, it was really interesting to see, because I've actually been in a similar situation with my child. Anyway, it just kind of reinforces your point, Nishina, around it's not about saying someone isn't a person of color, or denying that. That's for sure not. And one of the things I would say, Tom, to your question is, one of the things she talks about is how racism is not an individual action. Racism is a system. And that prejudice, individual prejudice, for sure is an individual action, and we can also individually discriminate. And so when you ask, what can we do? Are you asking, what can we do as a city, as an institution, or what can we do as individual or as people? Because that's, I think, two different questions.
For me, what I was intrigued by is just how would one want to be treated? And then if we had that discussion, that would inform us in terms of maybe as a commission, we even move into some of our work. And behind what I'm saying is, don't expect people to change to meet you on your terms. Find a way to meet people where they are and embrace who they are. And then if you really don't know what people expect or how they desire to be treated, so Nishina's words were made sense to me. Stop pretending there's not a difference. There's a difference among all of us, right? But I found myself saying, how would someone want to be treated? Because then that could inform us all in terms of what we should be doing. Does that make sense?
Yes. I would agree that we all are prejudiced in some way. It may not be racially prejudiced. It could be prejudice against people overweight. It could be prejudice against people who have learning disabilities. Maybe prejudice from people from different classes, financial classes. So learning and recognizing and being able to overcome those prejudice or striving to overcome that prejudice, I think, is an individual thing and attempting to improve. To recognize that, you know, people are different races and different colors. You need to learn. I think it's an opportunity to learn about, you know, I don't know a lot about the Indian culture. I don't know a lot about, you know, the Asian culture from the, you know, farther east. I've been in the Middle East. I've learned, you know, the Muslim culture. I've been in Europe and learned how people deal there. But I think it's an opportunity to learn and broaden our horizons, basically. Does that make sense at all to anybody?
I think one of the things that, as a person of color, Tom, to answer your question, that she talks about how the white is a default and everybody else is, you know, not deviant. What do I want to say? Something other. So this concept of othering is, I think, a basic premise. If you're talking about how do we want to be treated as people of color, we don't want to be treated as other, right? So, for example, I'll give you a real life example that happened to me at the Plateau Club. I was on a tee box with my husband, who is white. Five middle-aged men who were all white came up, and they were like waiting for us to tee off. They were watching us, and one of the guys kind of joked to my husband, saying, "Oh my God, you have an audience. This is, you know, all the pressure's on you." And he said something like, "I'll give you $100 if you, I don't know, hit it 200 yards," or I don't know, whatever he said. And then he looked at me and he said, "Or yen, like, or I'll give you 100 yen." And everybody had no idea that that was offensive or whatever, but it was what it made me feel like is, you're not American, you're not white like the rest of here. And so this club is for white people who are American, and you're Asian because you must use yen as your currency. And so it was a joke by him. I'm sure he didn't mean it like a mean racist thing. He didn't have this thing like, I hate all Asians, I'm going to make her feel bad. It was a microaggression, if you will. But the whole concept was, you're something other, right? You're something not white. And that does not feel good. When everybody, like, we have to be white if we're going to be good enough. And that's what she talks about, being white as a default. It's the same thing when people say, refer to coronavirus as the China virus. It's like, it's something other than white that's bad. So that's just one thing that I would say is this concept of othering and making anything that's not white something else. Now, a lot of people will say in that case, oh, but you are Asian. So what's wrong with him saying that, yeah, and like it wasn't like saying Asians are bad people. He was trying to be culturally sensitive to you. No, he was trying to other. He was trying to point out that I am different than everybody else who is standing there, or that I am different than most of the people on the thing. And again, he probably didn't have that whole thing. It just came out, right? I'm sure you didn't have like this long thought process. I'm going to say this to make her feel like she's something else, but that's basically what it was. So that's one thing that I'm just, in terms of how do we want to be treated? We don't want to be treated as something other than white. We just want to be treated as like a person, like everybody else.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's shocking and sad. Not that surprising, but shocking.
Surprising.
You know.
But I don't know. I think this book is about a lot more than that. About a lot more than just being prejudiced.
Yeah.
Joyce, I'd love to. Oh,
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just, what I found really interesting is, so I have read a lot about racism, and so for some of the concepts she has included were more of a refresher for me. But what I found really interesting about her argument in terms of why, you know, she articulates really well that even though people of color may have prejudices, she acknowledges the fact that it's not just white people who have prejudices. The people of color can be prejudiced, may not be self-aware, but she makes this really compelling argument that they cannot engage in institutional racism because they do not have legal authority, they do not control institutions. And that's one of the main reasons that even though individually people of color may be prejudiced, but they cannot engage in institutional racism, which was a really interesting argument and distinction that she makes.
Yeah, I've heard the definition of racism in another training that I've gone to that a lot of people use, is that you cannot be racist if you're a person of color. You can be prejudiced, you can be biased, but you can't be racist because we don't have the power. We have the prejudice. So what racism is a combination of prejudice plus power. The power to change things, the power to enforce laws, the power to have laws, right? People of color don't have that power in our government. If you look, and she gave all those statistics of how many, all of the decision-making bodies are dominated by white people. And so this is going to be hard to hear, but just using this term in terms of a academic study, academic term, only white people can be racist because you have the power to enact, to do pain, to cause harm with your prejudice. We do not. That kind of harm, it's systematic harm.
I thought when she shifted to another example around women's right to vote, that was helpful. Sometimes you shift out of the context, which has a lot of emotion around it, and it's like, oh, well, women actually needed to, the men had the power in that moment, right? And they wanted in, but they had to be kind of asked in, welcomed in a way, right? Which then puts protesting in context too, by the way, because that didn't happen without some serious, protests and speaking out. But anyway, I thought that was a good way of thinking about things as well.
Yeah,
Stan, were you going to say something, Stan?
Well, from the first two chapters, I kind of got the impression, and maybe it's just me, that if you're white, you're racist. And maybe it was just my impression.
I don't think.
And you don't have a choice over it because of, you know, you grew up in a society that's predominantly white, it's controlled by whites, so therefore you're racist.
I think the way she uses the term racism, she's talking about the system, not about any individual person.
Mhm.
So under her definition of racism, I don't think she was saying an individual white person is automatically racist. I think that we are all part of a system that provides power, that gives power and supremacy to white people and elevates white people. But I don't think she's talking about, she does not use the term racist to describe individual people.
Yeah, and I actually appreciated that quite a lot because, you know, there was a lot to digest, but I came away saying we all have some level of prejudice and discrimination, and you have to be present to that. But racism is a systemic action. And the question is, you may choose to be racist depending on the actions you're taking. She also said, if you ask anybody today if they're racist, without doubt, most people would say no. I mean, maybe those idiots in Charlottesville may have a different perspective, which, by the way, I went to the University of Virginia, and that was very sad to see down in Charlottesville as protests. Having said that, I came away feeling like racism
As did
is.
I.
You did?
Yeah.
Nice. Charlottesville always had a special place for me until that happened.
I'm sorry.
No, no, but it was, I had the same reaction.
Insane. So anyway, to stand to your point, I appreciate bringing it up, is I didn't come away saying, oh, all white people are racist. All white people have the opportunity to be racist if they participate in this system that we've been given. And I'll just say out loud, what I've struggled with on all of this sometimes is when someone says, I've been given unfair advantage or advantage others have it. Well, certainly I could tell a story, probably everybody on this call could tell a story of how hard it has been to get to where we all got. And it's easy to then say, darn it, I worked for it. This book does a good job saying, yeah, but there are those that could have been right where you are and they didn't have the advantage that you didn't even know you had. So the question then becomes, what action are you going to take to help right that ship a little bit? I mean, that's how I think about it. I don't know. I'm going to hit mute for a while now.
Yeah, me too. Joyce, we'd
And
love
I'm
to.
yes, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Joyce, sorry.
Are you asking me to talk about something?
Yeah, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
I think what I have as a problem with this book is that I identify too much with all the bad things she says about growing up in New England, you know, including Holyoke and Springfield and the wrong neighborhood to move into, being right close to my college. It's like, oh, come on, I recognize Holyoke and Springfield. And it's like, how did I miss all this? Where have I been? Why am I not more aware?
Because the whole society has told you that it's okay. You know, that I mean, all of the messages, I mean, I think that's a big learning, is that we're all, it's not just us, all of media, all of government, all of our history books, they're not going to tell you that. But we're in a time of awakening right now.
Yeah, yeah.
CJ, would you like to weigh in at all?
I said all I have to say.
Okay,
How about you,
well,
Carrie?
thank you.
I still love this sentence from whatever page 14 was. Key to moving forward is what we do with our discomfort. And it's like, all right, I'm discomfort, so I got to do something.
I love it, Joyce. Yeah, one of the questions I pulled out was, is there a particular piece that made you feel discomfort? That's where we're going to have our growing edge, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, how much
Rita,
did we
did you?
take for granted?
Sorry, Doris, sorry.
How much did we take for granted because we didn't know any better or any different?
Mm-hmm.
I would say my biggest thing growing up and through my career was being the only female in a bunch of men technical writers, and being the only female in the management of the Red Cross in Eastern Massachusetts. It wasn't the color. It wasn't the, it was dealing with the fact that I was working with all those testosterone people.
Mm-hmm. That's real too.
Yeah.
Harry, do you have something you want to that struck you? If it's particularly uncomfortable or that struck you as interesting?
The first chapters have been very thought provoking, and to say the least, I am. There are some aspects of it that I do wonder about, question, and that is, there seems to be a thread running through there that certain ideas or concepts such as rationality, objectivity, are somehow uniquely white white concepts that we should I don't think she's saying reject, but that we should recognize as being part of the system that we're dealing with. And that has me wondering, frankly, and thinking.
I'd be curious to hear what other folks think about that the idea of individualism and meritocracy. And how does that, what you all thought about that?
I personally thought it was a great framework and structure to start out with, because those are the ideals that at least I think about being an American and in our society. And there's about, you're on your own and an entrepreneur and you're individual and all that. And then she used those things that say, wait a minute, they're really constructs that you've grown up with, you've learned your way into. And so as much as you might want to say, is individuality important to you? Well, what she did was she showed that there's this racism within our society that's also embedded in how many have been raised. And so stop thinking you're bad for it, but don't allow yourself to get away with not acknowledging it and then doing something about it. So I thought it was a cool way of saying these are central pillars. Now, not all societies think individuality is good, actually, right? Some think it's bad. Yeah. But in America, God bless America, that is a thing we salute. Now, it might be changing, by the way. My kids have a very different view of this country than I did, I can tell you. And that leads to some spirited dialogue. And I don't know that they're wrong, actually. But anyway, I like the way she framed it up, because they were familiar pillars that then allowed me to compare what she then was going to talk about, which is this system we were raised in. And so it lessened the blow a little bit for me when she started talking about that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. I also used to have a problem, the idea of affirmative action and meritocracy and in conflict. And I just think that all of those things are great for us individuals to work hard or be rewarded at some level for their accomplishments that they studied or whatever it is. But I think it's based on this foundation that we're all equal, that we're all treated equal. If we all truly were starting from the same place, if we all had all the same advantages, that, then sure, meritocracy, you work hard, you get whatever. But But with the fact that we aren't, when you only focus on individualism or meritocracy, and that's your only focus, then you're ignoring that there are so many barriers for other folks. And that's the part. If you can hold two truths, right? You can hold that there's something really cool about someone because they worked really hard and they had these really great ideas and they've created these really wonderful things for our society. That's wonderful merit that they've done, and they deserve to make all the money off of it or whatever. But at the same time, you know, it's like the whole thing with that example with Jackie Robinson, I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
Like this idea that he was the first to break the barrier.
Yeah.
Well, there were many Black players before him who were probably just as good as him, if not better, but were not allowed because the white owners of the team and the white baseball players and everybody who was part of that system just did not allow it, right? So yes, we can say meritocracy. Jackie Robinson worked so hard and he's just so naturally talented and he deserved that. But what about all the Black players before him who also worked hard and were also talented, but were just not allowed? And so we can look at meritocracy and individualism, sure, as a good thing. But if we don't look at it in the full picture of what about those barriers? So I think that you can hold both truths as long as you look at it as a holistic picture. I don't know. That's how I'm thinking about it. Terry, does that resonate at all?
Yeah, and people often take a specific example and try to generalize. So, for example, when Obama became president, we started talking about having a post-racial society. Racism, we don't have any racism at all. So we often take these specific examples and then try to generalize, which, you know, is not very helpful in having a meaningful discussion about race in particular.
One way I've heard advantage described, and this doesn't entirely do this justice, what we're talking about, but we've all probably known folks that were born into particularly good circumstances, but they're actually not that present to it. They don't appreciate it. They don't even know what they've been given. So this concept of you were born on third base and you're acting like you just hit a triple, right? So this concept of what have you been given to get to create your current situation? And if we take nothing else from this, it's to be sensitized to the advantages we've all had and try and do something with that, pass it along, because we've all been blessed in so many ways, which is not to say we haven't worked hard, right? But there are some that are blind to that. They think it's their birthright because they were born in certain circumstances. And that in itself is where I think racism can really start to accelerate, because they think the system is for them and they're not opening it up to others. I don't know if that resonates. Joyce moved. It looks like she has something to say.
Get myself off of silent. That section on white progressives causing the most daily damage to people of color, and white people who think they are not racist are really, or already think they got it, don't got it. And what we need to be doing for the rest of our lives because of that. You know, and the list was engaging in ongoing self-awareness, continuing education. Well, obviously, I got to reread everything here at least 4 more times. And relationship building and actual anti-racist practice. Now, I have no idea how to take hold of that one. Yet, I haven't gotten the rest of the book yet.
So Joyce, there's a book by Dr. Idram Kendi called How to Be an Anti-Racist. I mean, I think she's probably making reference to that. Like, he's a well-known scholar.
Is that something I should read or not should read?
If you're interested, it's a very well-regarded book, but she's made references to Kendi in this book as well. So.
I'm reading How to Be an Anti-Racist right now. It's pretty academic. I think that this is a good intro. This is better to read first a little
Uh-huh.
bit easier to get some of these broad concepts in the way that Robin writes about it than
Yeah.
Ibram. But it's also an excellent book. I'm not saying it's not a book that you
Yeah.
should, because if you're interested, it's also very good.
Jody, one question you put forward, I thought
Mhm.
might be appropriate now, the one under chapter 2, because we're dancing around a little bit. What does it mean to say that race is socially constructed?
Mm.
I actually quite liked how they said, you know, the reality is genetically, once you go beneath the skin color or the look, which is geographic based mostly, by the way, all the others are social constructs. So how did you think about that? And if there's any thoughts to be shared?
Yeah, I mean, they say when you look at our DNA that 99 point something% of us are the same.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not biological. And I love the way that she lays out the history. And there's even deeper history than what she lays out about how we came up with the terms Caucasian, Caucasoid, Negroid, and Mongoloid, which goes back to even before, like before we were even a country here. But I like the way that she used the idea, the tension between the history of race, which is it was a social construct to justify treating people of color different inequity, right? So our country had these high morals of equality and justice, and that at the same time we were enslaving and murdering and raping Black Africans who were enslaved and brought here, right? So how did the only way that they could justify that was to say that genetically, biologically, they were lesser than. They were 2/3 human or whatever it was. And so it was a racial construct to be able to just wrap your head around, like, oh, we love this idea of all men are created equal, except that we're enslaving Black people. So they had to come up with something, and they created this construct. But when you come down to it, when you look at biology, we're 99% the same.
Mhm.
So it's a social construct designed specifically to justify slavery in our country. But actually, it was a social construct even before that to justify the colonialism, and goes even further back than that. So I think that's really instructive, because I think a lot of people go, oh, but we're all, Black people have this and white people are this genetically or whatever, but I don't know. How do other folks feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a helpful way of framing up. And then again, coming from Charlottesville in Virginia, Thomas Jefferson is not looking so good these days in some aspects. But, even when he said, I want to prove scientifically that, the Black people are somehow not like the rest of us, and he actually commissioned scientists, and so they didn't, and the way she framed it up, it's all about the question you ask. It's not so much is there a difference, it was, and I'm not going to get this correctly, but it wasn't is there a difference, it was why are they inferior or something like that. And so you're going down different paths, and it actually is that example is instructive for even how we think about giving grants and what we're trying to do in our own community. The question we ask is going to be critical to how we support and who we support, I think.
I also think that whole idea of that race is a social, not the whole idea, but that race is a social construct it's evident when you see how it's just constantly changing. Like, what do we consider white? Like, as you said, Italians and Irish were not considered white, but then we had other folks that they were pushing down to be at the bottom of the barrel. So in the hierarchy, so, now they're white, and brown people were not white. And even the recent one, like you talked about, Nishina, about that other group,
Armenians,
right?
or even Indian Americans, like were classified as white at some point. People of Middle East origin still have trouble. They don't identify as white, but in the census they are classified as white. Did you know that? Like I have Middle Eastern colleagues at Gates who, don't see themselves as white, but they are classified as white. So this.
Yeah. And the Spanish, I mean, it's like not knowing how if it really was scientific, then we would know that this group is not white and this group is white. But because it keeps changing as, so that's where it's just like a made up thing that we use to justify or classify folks for whatever purpose. It's interesting.
Stan, I'm going to have to excuse myself. Somebody's come to the house I need to talk to. We'll see you all next time.
All right, CJ.
I don't know. That's interesting. I don't know. Curious, Stan, do you have any? Be curious to hear what
I
our white
do.
colleagues feel about that.
My children, I was married to a Puerto Rican woman, so my children are biracial, believe it or not. I mean, some people don't see Puerto Ricans as Hispanic, but they are. And when it comes to, do they classify themselves as white or Hispanic? It's hard to draw the line sometimes now with, mixed relationships across different races. And my children identify as Puerto Rican, and I'm glad, I'm happy. Personally, it makes no difference to me if they were Puerto Rican or not. But I was amazed when, earlier we were talking about prejudiced and racist and things like that. I was amazed when I married a Puerto Rican woman and got to know her family that they really looked down upon people from Mexico. People from Mexico to them were dirt. And it was surprising because, I mean, growing up, I grew up in a segregated neighborhood, but it was, blacks and whites. It wasn't Hispanics or anybody from Asia. I mean, it was just, so I found that interesting personally. How someone individually identifies. President Obama, came from a mixed marriage. He identified as a black man. His mom was white. It's interesting to see. I don't know if that's because I look black, so therefore I am black, or I look white, so therefore I am white. What is there anybody that has, since we were talking about, the social side of things, how do you identify?
That's why it's just made up. That's why it's unclear.
I think it is.
But they did in the book talk about that you could be physically identified as white, but in fact you identify with another ethnic group. And there definitely have been times as the country has grown where people tried through the census, wanted to be considered Caucasian, right? Because somehow it was considered a disadvantage. And I mean, to me, so if you take a big step away from this, I sometimes think, because Nishina talked about, there is racism evident in other cultures too. And when I was at Starbucks, I worked a lot with folks from South Korea and Japan for a little while. And there was a lot of racism in that part of the world too. And then I find myself saying, what is it? Because you could argue over time, as the world gets bigger, everyone is going to actually weirdly start to look the same. Not entirely, but, and this might be centuries down the road, right? So not so much in my lifetime anyway. But I find myself wondering, is there really a tribalness underneath that? And if you buy that, what drives it? I think it's sometimes around safety or fear. And it's about people want to align with a group because somehow they think another group is not as good as they are, they're fearful, or they're concerned. And none of that's good. I'm not arguing for it at all. But it's just this, if you were to try and minimize this, what might you do to make people feel included in some way?
Yeah, I think we have to find ways to include other races and other, even genders, into our own personal relationships. That the people we associate with, the people, you invite over to dinner, the people that you go out with. Because if you don't do that, you don't learn, you don't broaden your horizons. If you stay within your, social economic group, you're not going to learn that, somebody who's disadvantaged or someone who's better off than you are, how they are and how they react, what they go through. We have to get out of our own little boxes that we're in a lot of times. That's just me.
Were there any other things that folks read in here that we hadn't talked about that made you feel uncomfortable or question? I appreciate those conversations, the things that you've mentioned, Joyce and Terry too, about what makes you uncomfortable or what doesn't feel quite right, or
I'll just say, sorry, Joyce, go ahead.
Just like what we can overcome as far as some of these hurdles along the way. We have better understanding. Setting aside your sense of uniqueness, just looking at the broader folk, the broader look, the broader culture, not just that we grew up in. I'm back
I
to my
found myself. Sorry, Joyce, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just back to the bird cage. The fact that you got that blinder business.
Yeah, I really
I
like
appreciate this conversation.
Her use, and I almost want to say insistence, and Jody, you touched on this a little bit, of how she wants to use the phrase white supremacy was unsettling for me. And I wondered if it was getting in the way of what her message was, which was articulate and well presented. But when you use a phrase that has such baggage, and this is a fairly recently written book, talks about, the Trump administration, talks about Obama. I found myself wondering why she insisted on that, because the words themselves, if they didn't carry the baggage, would make sense, but there is such baggage. It seemed like she still went down that path, and I don't think it was actually necessarily helpful or good.
what would be a different term that you would use to capture what she's talking about?
Question. I have to think about that. I mean, there's something about systemic that really she's going to, that there is, systemic is also often used in systemic racism, but it's also white systemicism, if that's a word. Just made it up. But she's attaching to it so closely, and everybody saw the pictures in Charlottesville and elsewhere of these crazy idiots. I think she did do a good job, though, saying separately, no one is really going to admit they're racist. That's just not, I mean, very, very few. But behind the scenes, they might tell you that, but yet racism has gone underground a little bit. And then it was a little disappointing. I did read the 3rd chapter, and I have high hopes for the next generation. And how she said, well, it's still there, was a little disappointing to me.
I have a perception on the white supremacy, and Tom, honestly, I came from the same place you were maybe about 5 years ago, when that term was being used in circles of people of color talking about the same thing. And so I don't know if this is just my own thought.
Go for it.
People of color, Black people in particular, from their perspective, white supremacy, not used to describe just white nationalists, but what their experience is, which is the systemic elevation of whites dominant culture, and white people are elevated in value versus what they are valued as. And so for them, white supremacy feels accurate because from their perspective, everything in our country elevates white people and puts down Black people. Right? And so why can't we use a word that resonates for them, that feels right for them, instead of trying to make white people feel comfortable? So like for you, the term doesn't feel comfortable, right? And I get it, because I honestly felt the same way as you did. But I've kind of thought, okay, let's put myself really in the Black person's perspective around systemic racism and the elevation of white people and white values and white dominant culture. And how everything is for the white people. Everything for me too. A lot of times when I'm in community talking about race, it's about making white people feel comfortable. Even not talking about race, but talking about other things. I have to like make sure white people feel comfortable so they don't do something to me because I'm a person of color, and they could take away my funding or they could do all these things to me. And so at some level, it's kind of like Black people or people of color saying, okay, come on, like, let's call it what it is. It's making white people better than us. That's what we've done for all these generations. Let's just call it. And why can't you just use that term? Because that's what it is. Instead of like, it makes me feel uncomfortable because it makes me look like I'm a white nationalist, like that whole thing. So anyway, that's just the alternative.
No, it's well stated. And that's what her intent was. That was definitely her intent. And
yeah, I don't know. Anyway, it's interesting because I also felt that way. I also felt I've been part of another racist, anti-racist training that says all white people are racist because they have power and privilege, and people of color cannot be racist. So basically, they were trying to, and I go, why do you have to say that? It's just so inflammatory. It like turns white people off immediately, right? And that was my feeling when I went to the training. I've gone to this People's Institute training like 3 or 4 times now. And by the 4th time, I'm like, okay, I get it. I totally get it. You're right. Like people of color can't be racist. We don't have any power. But it's just really interesting to hear from their perspective. Like, how do we talk about this stuff from their perspective, not necessarily from our perspective?
No, thank you for that. Yeah, I struggle with it, but I
struggle with it too. Yeah. No one wants to be aligned with white nationalist crazy people. Like
much.
That's kind of the way when I see it, that's like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm not one of those extremists that are out there tearing things up and beating up Black people. That's not where my heart's at. That's not where my mind's at. But when you're, white supremacy, that's immediately where your brain goes, because the media's came across with that too, So you're fed it so much that when you hear the term in a different context, you go, oh my God, there's no way that's what it is.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I had to reread that part once I hit the term white supremacy to truly understand where she was coming from.
Well, what she says is the reason we have to name it is if we don't name it, it's invisible. This idea that we uplift white people and put down Black people, like in terms of and so we have to name it as a system. I thought was really powerful is like, like we don't name it as a system. Like we talk about economics, and we talk about other types of systems, but we don't talk about white supremacy as a system. And if we don't name it, it becomes invisible. And if it's invisible, we'll never address it. And I thought, that's so interesting.
And I don't think it's just Black folk. I also think that it's any person of color that, white supremacy comes out, because that's the way society has been designed, and that's the way people tend to believe and think, because that's your exposure. Since we're
Well,
all
and
little
that,
kids.
I was just thinking that I'm going to ask
Yeah.
you. Go ahead, Stan. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I
I'm
was
just
thinking of
rambling.
that thought actually, and Jody, last time I think we talked, you had a great way of framing up. So there is racism toward blacks, and then there's racism toward many ethnic groups. But you at the time had a sense that we do need to take care that we're addressing this relative to not just people of color, but blacks because of their circumstances. And it's made me think a lot, right? Which is not to say racism in any form is okay, it isn't. But how do you think about that, and what thoughts might you share?
I'm happy to share, but I feel like I'm talking about, and Sheena, do you want to feel that one?
Yeah, so there's this very well-known Harvard sociologist called Mary C. Waters, and she has written a lot about voluntary and involuntary minorities. And so immigrants who have come to this country have come here voluntarily, right? So they have a completely different history, and their relationship with the white community is also different. The way they are perceived is different. They've come to this country voluntarily. The perception is that, oh, they've come to better their lives or to get better economic opportunities. The same is not true for African Americans. They came to this country involuntarily. They have a long history of slavery that they have endured. And so you have to really, there is that distinction between immigrant groups or people of color who immigrated to this country versus African Americans who've had this long history, with slavery and forced slavery. So it's important to make that distinction. We are not all the same, and our history is very different. Our backgrounds are different.
I think that's so true, and I think we also want to think about Indigenous people as well.
Yeah.
So, Black and Indigenous folks, again, as Nasheen, completely involuntarily, genocide was used against them for the Black and Indigenous folks, and then I think with Black folks, they had hundreds of years of slavery, and then we had the Jim Crow laws, which were actual laws that put Black people back into slavery, basically, right? Because the South needed free labor to continue their prosperity that they had off the backs of Black people. And our whole economic system, if you want to look at it, was built on our country's foundation off the backs of Black people, off the backs of slaves. Like, we would not have had as prosperous an economy as we had if we didn't have free labor back then. And everything since then is built on that. So there's that piece of, like, we just have to acknowledge that where we are today in this country is off the backs of Black people. And again, we think about this individualism and meritocracy, and no, we did it because we hard worked. Yes, in general, individually, but as a country, we were founded on slavery, 400 years of slavery. So there's that piece. And then we literally kept enslaving them through our laws. We don't call it slavery, but the Jim Crow laws made it illegal for them to, stand without being employed. Well, there were no jobs at that time, right after slavery, when they were left. So then they were put back in, and they had to, what did they have to do? Go work in the fields. And then we had, later on, in more recent times, we've had mass incarceration because we've criminalized behavior that disproportionately affected Black folks, right? We had, you could get years in jail for marijuana, but then not using cocaine. So why is that? Well, white people were using cocaine. I mean, literally, those are the kinds of decisions that were made. Even in here, she talks about, now I'm forgetting, there's that one thing of the Southern strategy.
Yeah, yeah.
They knew, they were consciously saying, like, this is what we need to do to keep Black people from getting power. And they put that in our laws. So we have
the whole vote thing.
over again, but we haven't done that for Well, in some ways we have for some of the other immigrant communities, we have the Chinese exclusion laws and all of that.
Yeah.
But we just have this long history
Yeah.
of our country's laws
Yeah.
constantly putting Black people down and enslaving them. So that's
And
why
it's not just about laws, it's also the actual treatment, the physical treatment of Blacks. So I'm from a public health background, and I did HIV prevention research for many years. And what we found in our work was that the African American community was extremely there was a deep mistrust within the African American community as far as accessing public health services was concerned. And that's grounded in all the past experimentation that has been done with them. Like you may have heard of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, you know,
Yes.
it's a well-known experiment. And there were other experiments that were done using African Americans. So there's a deep mistrust within the African American community in terms of accessing public health services. And the irony of the situation is that they face a lot of health disparities. So for them to have this deep mistrust, like, you know, it further, you know, puts them at risk.
Worsens your situation.
But because of the history, it's very hard to counter that mistrust.
Mm-hmm.
So it's,
You're on
Julie,
mute.
can't hear you.
the other piece I think is not just about white people, it's non-Black people of color who haven't had the same experiences as the Black community, the same history, right? And so, as Nishina said, we had a different experience. Sure, we had discrimination and all of that stuff is not good. You know, Stan talks about that a lot. It's not just about Black people. Certainly, other people of color have had lots of discrimination. But we have also benefited from not being Black, right? Like I get a lot of benefits as the model minority. The model minority was created, that concept was created to put down Black people.
Yeah.
So that people can say, look at the Asians.
Yeah.
All you need to do, here's the meritocracy. All you have to do is study and work hard, and it's your fault because you didn't study and work hard. The Asians, they do that and they're doing great. Like it was specifically created to pit Asians against Black people and to lift up Asians above Black people. And I've benefited.
But
So
that distorts the reality, though. That distorts the reality. Our immigration system is such that the most highly educated people from Asia are able to come to this country. So it's not that they're already highly qualified. So they're going to come here and do well. It's not that you're bringing just any Asian. So it's a very distorted. It's a very distorted fact that Asians like work hard and they do really well. It's because you bring the cream de la creme from those countries.
Right. All the
the more privileged people, actually, the more educated people.
So I guess just again, just from that perspective, as not being a non-Black person of color, I have to look at my own privilege, just as white people need to look at their privilege, and see how I have benefited from putting down or from the discrimination and racism, institutionalized racism of Black and brown folks. And I have to own that because there's as you said, there's lots of discrimination between different groups. And there's certainly a lot of anti-Black sentiment in the Asian community. And so anyway, I just have to do my own work as well around that. So that's part of, that's along lots of different pieces to answer your one question, Tom. Sorry if it wasn't linear.
Any thoughts on, as you know, we're here at 8:15 or more. The questions that keep coming that I have are, one, how do we act on this, and what I use the term indicated actions. What are indicated actions relative to human services or the city of Sammamish? And it might be too early for this because the next question is, what do we do next? You know, we've read between 2 and 3 chapters. Stan, the brown noser in the class, read 6 chapters or something. But you know, it feels like
Oh.
there's more here, but we also have a lot of work to do on the commission. So I'm wondering, like, how do we create action out of this relative to our community, and or what should we be doing relative to this book? Any thoughts?
Well, I think by reading this book, we're going to increase awareness. I also think that when we are looking at grants and people that are applying for grants, maybe we look at a broader list in the future and make sure that we're bringing in different cultures and different races, because it does exist. And I don't know how to do it, but I think we need to take it into consideration.
Yeah, I think that again, as I've mentioned before, I think educating ourselves is the first step and something that we can all benefit from individually as just people, but also in our roles as commissioners. And I want to encourage us to just kind of keep plowing through this book, because I think there's lots more here. And then, you know, maybe after that, doing another book. I mean, I think this work takes time, and one couple of chapters or one book is not going to completely shift us. And always having these conversations, it's really like pushing us to our edges and discomfort where we're going to keep learning. So I think just educating ourselves is huge. I don't really feel like we need to have like exactly to see how is this going to action to change how we're doing business, at least not at this early stage. And I think that the commitment for me is this longer term, like really shift, and not knowing that this work is so hard. It's so hard to unlearn the socialization that we've had. You know, like Joyce's, I can feel it from you, Joyce. I know it's like, oh my God, all these years, how do I undo this? It just seems overwhelming. But we're taking the first step, and I really commend the commission for doing it. And I think it's a long journey. It's not like we have to come up with the answer right now.
And we're not going to.
We're not going to.
We need to know more on the demographics of the people who are being served by our nonprofits. I mean, right now, all we have is the count of residents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, when grants are submitted, we say, are you, reaching out to other communities? But we don't know what numbers are there,
Yeah. The homeless,
I would also ask, what does your leadership look like? Who's on your board?
I thought about the same thing today. It's like, how many people on this board of directors are of different nationalities, different racial makeups, different cultures? I mean, we're talking about the Black culture right now, but we need to make sure we're serving everyone. You look at Namish and you look at how diverse we truly are as a city. Are we providing services to everyone? And I think that's important.
I think mostly, like, when we look at boards, we want to see leadership. Are they reflective of the people that they serve?
Mm-hmm. And how do we know unless we get those demographics?
We don't.
Do we want to give ourselves some time to, because it's been a great discussion, in my opinion, and it points up as much as what we are learning about. And I think what's nice is we're all just present to the journey here as we talk. Do we want to give ourselves time to finish this book and reconvene for kind of another discussion on this in 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it might be? I don't know. I know we have grants to cogitate on.
Oh, the next one's a big fight, guys.
What's that?
Yeah, we need to go.
The next meeting is a big fight. It's basic needs against the rest of you.
Yeah, so we got
the minimum dollar that's available. So we got to go big.
So we're also going to need to look at our long-term calendar again and figure out where we can plug in another session for this book. Because
Are people supportive of that? I just
the
want to
media-
I think we
check
should.
in.
No,
I want
I,
to finish reading it. And
yeah,
see
I
what the-
am. I would think though that rather than having say, you know, okay, now read the next, I looked at, if you read through, I think chapter, I think to page 98, and then the whole book is 150. I would suggest next session, give us enough time so we can have finished the entire book
I agree.
and discuss it there. One thing that someone was talking about the diversity of the boards and the leadership of the grant the people that are applying to us. I saw that for some cities, as I understand it, Rita, this is basically a standard application, but cities have the opportunity to add things to it. I saw some applications where there was the city of Renton and whatever. And I'm just wondering for the next cycle, if we want to add something like that to get those demographics. I know that for Friends of Youth, virtually all of their people that they're making to the foundations and, well, less so the cities, but the foundation, things like that, they want to know that. I mean, that's part of the grant application. Tell us about your leadership. Tell us about your board. Somebody just said, does your organization look like the people that you're serving?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
That's
And I
a
do
good-
like the idea of finishing the book.
So I'd like to say, let's finish reading the book before we go to the next session on discussion.
Yep.
Does everybody concur?
Yeah,
Yeah, what I would suggest is that maybe next week on the 12th, we could take just a few minutes to say, okay, to look at our long-term calendar and then see if we can find a date for another conversation like this.
Okay, next week's going to be a full meeting, by the way.
Yeah, I agree. No, I'm not suggesting, all I'm suggesting is to try to have a short conversation to try to find a date for another meeting.
Yeah,
The meeting of the 26th is going to be a hard meeting.
yeah, it's, so.
How do we get our
the book
numbers to what we can propose?
Yeah, so book discussion will have to be after the 26th. So you got plenty of time to read. Jody,
So,
go
but
take a
Barry,
nap.
Dan, maybe you and I connect with Rita and Mike, and we come back with a proposed next date for the book discussion, which is definitely going to be after the 26th. We have to also work that in terms of when we have to present to council what our recommendation is. But, you know, I
Right.
think if we take 6 weeks or more to finish it, I think that'd be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to finish it anyway. It's just finding time between taking care of Karma, taking care of the house, because now I got house duties as well, and working all day. So, oh, poor pitiful me, right?
You're gonna be a busy
Well, you
guy.
must now really appreciate your wife now that you have to do all the work she does.
I've always appreciated my wife. I adore my wife.
You're so sweet.
Come September, it's 25 years.
Wow, that's awesome.
That's the longest I've ever been in any kind of relationship with anyone. But anyway, guys,
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
our next meeting will be on the 12th. I think tonight was productive. It gave us a chance to start thinking too. It gave us time to reflect a little bit. and get other points of view. I think it was beneficial, or at least for me it was. Meeting on the 12th will be reviewing basic needs. Joyce, you guys have got a heck of a book, right? It was you, Terry, and CJ?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Against the rest of you for the
Well-
numbers, right?
Yeah, so you want to try to take everybody else's money, is what you're saying.
30,
There's too much
30
process to
30
mental health in this.
applications.
Gotta watch that, Joyce.
There's too
Yeah.
much relationship
And then
between
we're
basic
also-
needs and mental health, though.
There's
Work
a lot
together.
of crossover.
Yep.
Nashina, we kind of noticed there's a lot of crossover between
Yeah.
mental health and all the other areas too.
Yeah.
Once we started looking. And I think all the grants are kind of integrated in one way or another. So, and we'll also discuss how we're going to come up with a process for a final recommendation.
And ask
Is
for
there
more.
anything else, guys? Anything else?
Nope. Thank
I
you,
don't
guys.
think so.
How about a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
And all in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thanks,
guys.
guys. I appreciate you
Guys,
guys.
good chat.
And I
Thanks,
appreciate.
guys. Have a
I
lovely
appreciate the
evening.
discussion, too.
Take care,
You
guys.
too, guys. I'll talk to you later.
Right, a question to you? You know anybody going to be at City Hall tomorrow so I can drop off a notary letter to the stormwater people?
Let me see. I
Good night.
will be. I can be. So because I've got to go and pick up cards from the food bank. So do you have an idea of what time you're thinking? Because I'm
Anytime
sure I
you
can
say.
coordinate with you.
Anytime you say.
Okay. You know what? Why don't we do this? Let me look at my calendar. I've got a, let's see. You know what? Okay, you know what? I will make it work, Joyce. I will make it work because I want to give those cards to the police. So I need to come into City Hall anyway. So should we, are you okay, Joyce, if I touch base with you tomorrow? Because I want to make sure I get in something for Mike for the agenda bill. So I'm thinking kind of like after midday. Yeah. So I have your number. What's the best? Should I give you a call or should I email you? What's the best way to?
Why don't you just use the cell phone? Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll call you on your cell phone. Yeah. Remind me again of your number, Joyce, please.
425-444-1892.
1892. Okay,
Yeah.
I am thinking it is going to be like after lunch. I would say like between 1 and 2, that kind of thing. So I just need to get some work out of the way and done before I allow myself to go pick up those cards. So yes, I absolutely can do that, and then I can meet you. I can take your letter, and then you just want me to drop it off to stormwater, or
Yeah, it's to Stephanie because it's part of the temporary easement to divert a river that comes down between our house and the one to our west. And they want to put a little bit of a culvert thing in. It's like, okay, now it's notarized, but I can't drop it off at City Hall because nobody will come to the door. And nobody
I know.
can
Oh, actually, you'll be
carry it in.
busy tomorrow because it's last day for voting, isn't it? So yeah, no, absolutely. I plan to be there because I need to drop off cards to the police. I'm thinking early afternoon, but I will call you,
And I
Joyce.
can come over
I mean,
then,
but don't put your plans on hold or anything. I feel awful you waiting on me. Let's say like 1 o'clock around that area, around that time.
Sure.
Yeah.
When I hear from you, I will come.
Okay, perfect. Like between 1 and 2 thereabouts. Okay, fabulous. Well, thank you so much. And Joyce, can I just say, I just so applaud the way that you always want to learn and you're always so open. And I think that's such an amazing trait. It's so cool. So I'm in so much awe of you. I really am. You're just always open and you want to learn. And, you know, I think that's an amazing way to be.
Never too late.
Well, I wish more people were like you, Joyce. I really do. So thank you for being you. Give my
Thank you.
give my best regards to Norm and have a lovely evening.
You too. Thanks.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.
How do I leave, Mike? Let's see.
Kind of
Oh, you leave for me. Look at that.